Hello, everybody, and welcome to Stewing the Pot. This is Greg Stewart, and this story is about a couple who was married, who had an amazing lifestyle, and all of a sudden it just came crashing down as they were driving through their home in Georgia, uh, headed back home. They were just enjoying time. One person was driving, who was the friend of a gentleman by the name of Tex McIver. His wife, Diane, was in the passenger seat, and again, his friend is driving, Diane is in the passenger seat, and Tex is sitting in the back. This is Diane and Tex McIver. And all of a sudden, he shoots his wife. Now, you're going to find out, was this an accident or was this murder? Because he states that he knew we were going through a bad neighborhood and I wanted to make sure we were protected. So he requested from his wife, in the glove box is my gun. Can you give this to me? Then she gives him the gun. I don't know how far the distance was where they were to get home, but supposedly Tex falls asleep. And then as they're driving, he abruptly wakes up at one point, pulls the trigger of his gun, which was sitting on his lap, and his wife is killed. Now, Tex proclaims that this was an accident. When his wife was taken to the hospital before she went into the operating room, she also stated this was not foul play. We're going to elaborate about that, but let's stew the pot together, shall we? All right, before we get into the case of Diane McIver, the murder of Diane McIver, or the accident of Diane McIver. Remember, you're my assistant, you're my life coach with me. So there's going to be poll questions coming up in reference to you being a part of this case and seeing how you feel this should have played out. And in this case, was it an actual murder or was it an accident? But before we can do that, if you would please like, subscribe, and share this podcast and help me grow this podcast, I totally appreciate it. And I thank you very much. So moving on now, the story of murder or an accident, Diane and Tex McIver. Okay, so on the night in question, first we want to get to connect to the cast of characters. We have Diane McIver, we have Tex McIver, and then we have their longtime great friend, Dani Jo. And that morning, now before we get into it, that morning they had breakfast together. They had a plan to go back home because Tex owned a ranch just on the outskirts of the city of Atlanta, but they owned a condo in basically the nicest area in downtown Atlanta. So their plan was to have their breakfast, prepare for their day, and then later on in the later part of the afternoon slash evening, they would go back to Atlanta. Before they did that, they went to the three of them together to Longhorn Steakhouse. Now, as they are at Longhorn Steakhouse, Dani Jo basically doesn't drink, but Tex and Diane do drink, at least have a couple drinks, I should say. They're not alcoholics or anything that's on record. So, because they were drinking, they suggested that Dani Jo, their good friend, would drive them home. Well, she says, sure, I'll drive. We're going in the same direction. We all are here together. We came here together. We stayed at the ranch together. Why not? So she's driving as they go into the outskirts of Atlanta, and certain areas are known for crime. This brought up a red flag for Tex at one point. So Tex said, hey, honey, in the glove box there, because it is Tex's vehicle primarily, he says, can you reach into the glove box? And as she opens it up, there's a gun. He goes, yep, that's what I want. Go ahead and grab the gun. Now, oddly, it's in a Publix plastic bag. Why he puts it in a bag and then puts it in there is beyond me, but the facts are what they are. So she reaches and grabs this gun and she hands it back to Tex, who's sitting in the back. So again, you have their friend, You have Diane, and Tex is exactly right behind Diane. Now, he places the gun on his lap. How he's holding the gun, the assumption is that how he's holding it, even though the bag is on it, his hand is on the trigger of the gun. At least that is the assumption. There is no confirmation. These are all guesstimates when this case does go to trial. But so as you're driving through, he says the reason why I want this gun is because this neighborhood has been known to have some bad elements, from gang problems to carjackings to, he even mentioned, for an odd reason, Black Lives Matter. And the reason why he stated later is because there's a lot of aggression against people who make money or are very powerful in our area, that they might hold animosity towards us. So this was all of his paranoia, basically building up on why he wants his gun when driving through this particular neighborhood and working his way back to their condo. Now, with that being said, he falls asleep. He falls asleep, and maybe the car hit a red light abruptly, whatever it was. Tex gets up, and as he jolts up, boom, the gun shoots, goes right through her left side and out, I guess, into the area, because the diagram that I'm going to show you shows the bullet passing through. And Diane at this point realizes she's shot. As she realizes she's shot, at this point, they now say, hey, we have to get Diane to the hospital. So here's your first question in reference to your poll question. Okay, so you have your first question of the podcast, but here's the thing I'm curious about. If you're driving, now supposedly Tex had a problem with sleep. He had deprivation. I think there might have even been a case of some sleep apnea, whatever it is. He had a couple drinks. So let's add all these facts. But you're telling your friend, Dani Jo, you're telling your wife, Diane, that we're going through this neighborhood. Okay, we're going through this neighborhood. I want to be aware because I've heard things, and you heard the statements he's made. You fall asleep. You fall asleep in reference to going through a neighborhood that you should be aware of because you requested your gun. How does that sit with you? So again, place your answers in reference to the poll questions in the comment area. But again, our first clue as a coach is, once again, you're going through a neighborhood, Tex. Should you be pretty alert around you? You don't have that far to go, because now you're in the city of Atlanta. You're saying, or just on the outskirts of Atlanta, and that we're almost at our condo, and you fall asleep only minutes away from where you live. All right, let's move on. So at this point, Diane is shot. It's going through her left side organs, and Tex says, Dani Jo, we got to get her to the hospital. Okay, so I know we're near Piedmont. Now, she says this to Tex. No, we need to go to Emory. Now, if you look at the map, and they live in this area, there's three hospitals very close by to them. But Tex wants to go out of the way to Emory Hospital. Now, did he not calculate? A lot of people say, a lot of people from Tech's world, as well as Diane and Dani Jo, they always emphasize that they like Emory. It's closer to the suburbs where they have their ranch. So a lot of the people from that area go there. And that he probably was more accustomed to, whenever he did need medical care, to go to that hospital. So it was only normal to say this. So this is what was said, at least during the trial and during the investigation. But do you think that's a little odd that your lady is bleeding? In fact, Dani Jo even testifies that there were moments where she was in and out of consciousness because she's losing so much blood. So She ends up taking them to Emory, even though there was three hospitals and the trauma center closer to where they were. So at this point, she's losing an unbelievable amount of blood. They finally get to Emory, and they call ahead because they said, "We're here. Come on out." The emergency staff comes out. Tex is helping, as the video cameras would show if you were watching the cameras or videos in reference to other ID channel stuff. But anyway, so he's helping. They get her through, and they're going to rush her to the emergency room. Now, Diane does say, Diane does say that, hey, this isn't on purpose. He didn't, this was totally an accident. So there is no foul play here. And then they get her into surgery, and unfortunately, 2 hours into surgery, Diane passes away. Now, the investigation begins. And exactly what's transpiring, what you heard thus far, is what Tex is sticking by and what Dani Jo is basically referencing to as well. She said, look, this is what happened. We were going through the neighborhood. He had his gun. It was on his lap. Why did it fire, though, is what they're saying. Did you have your hand on the trigger? And so that was the biggest thing. Was your hand, he goes, I admit that I shot her, but again, it was out of pure just adrenaline, meaning I was sleeping. I got woken up abruptly, and my hand just reacted. Wasn't like I meant to pull the trigger. Now, there's two ways of thinking here. They said when they brought it to a specialist in reference to this particular gun, I believe it was a 38, and they said you can have it like a half cock where it's a touch and it's ready to go, or you could have it fully in chamber. I'm not much of a gun person, but how they described it was that you have to add a little more pressure to shoot it off. Now, they're referencing to the first one I said that it was already kind of like halfway through, that only a touch could get this thing to set off. And supposedly in the case in forensics, they did both versions and showing how light you would have to touch for that gun to literally go off the way it did. So some of them are starting to see this as an accident. Tex ends up getting a pretty good attorney for what you can get in Atlanta as well as anywhere. They're great attorneys. So this guy is the leading defense attorney in Atlanta. Tex hires him. They're referencing, look, this is what happened. She even admitted it to the medical staff. So my client, unfortunately, though a tragedy, he's innocent. He's innocent. So they said, well, we're going to investigate a little more. We're obviously going to bring you to court and talk to a judge and see if the people among your peers feel the same way. So Tex is out on bail. As Tex is out on bail, this is where it's going to become a very interesting story. But beforehand, here's your next poll question. So Tex is out on bail. 2 months later, as they're still looking into things, wondering, do we go to court, the police? Do we not go to court at this point? Tex decides to have an auction of Diane's estate. And the timing just did not look right for him. But it was conclusive that the funds that he was making in reference to selling parts of her estate was because he wasn't responsible in a sense for her estate's employees and the people that worked for her. So the monies that were going to be made by auctioning her stuff was to pay them. That was conclusive, that was confirmed. But at the time, it looked like it made a whole bunch of people saying, oh, look what he's doing. He's selling her stuff. This was definitely a planned thing. So then that comes out, probably has a pretty decent clean slate, except his friend Dani Jo. She comes out after speaking to the police because she says Tex has not been treating me right, and something came over me that I guess I forgot to mention during the evening when we were pulling into the hospital. Tex says, "What I'm about to tell you will be for your greater good. So you don't get involved in this mix with media because this is going to hit where people know of Diane, they know of me. This is going to be big in the media. I'd like you to say that you was never with us and that this just happened. But does this make any sense?" Now, the cameras confirm at the hospital as well as other locations where they spent the evening that they were together. But basically says, this gets you out of the circle with us. So how would you have shot her then if Dani Jo wasn't with you? Do you do one of these and you stick your hand behind the seat and you pull the trigger and you were alert and you were aware? So this was really weird. And then he started getting nervous. He called and left a message saying in reference to Dani Jo's husband. I guess it went through there because she didn't get the message at first, and then he played it for Dani Jo. But it says, "Remember what we talked about? Please erase all voice messages. Please just, don't say anymore. Tell your wife this because it sounds like she's trying to send me down the river." Well, that didn't go any further really after that part because the police already concluded their investigation and decided to let Tex go. So Tex gets out right around Christmas time, and at the moment he's a free man. But is he? Because of all of these things that were adding up, and even though the police investigation said, well, it does clearly look like an accident, and everybody is supporting it, and Diane really did say at the hospital that this was an accident. Well, the DE, the basically district attorney, emphasized the DA that this still looks weird to us. And we're going to investigate this, which is exactly what they did. But here's your next poll question before we go into the district attorneys basically looking into this case and seeing what they could connect on and what they could find out. Take a look at this poll question first. Okay, so at this point, Tex is out. They said it was involuntary manslaughter was the actual charge. And DA just, this wasn't sitting right. He said, you're going to blame it on going into a neighborhood. You're going to blame it on people who are emphasizing Black Lives Matter by, we don't want that to come back to us because I said something about a neighborhood that is bad. So all of these things, the DA was like, this isn't washing for me. So they went and investigated. And what they found out was that Tex actually, who was when he first got involved in a relationship, he was more well off than Diane. But as they became together and they got married, his spending spree went to the point of almost $25,000 a month, and it started decreasing and making bad moves and adding on to their ranch and putting basically a clubhouse slash a place for people to stay called a saloon by what they said was Diane's idea, but yet he requested the money to build that from Diane, which was $350,000. So if this is Diane's idea, then why would you ask her to invest? Which Diane said, okay, but you're going to need to sign some paperwork, even though you're my husband, referencing that as my husband, because one of the main things about this storyline is that when they met, they said, your money is your money, my money is my money, no matter how we progress. Well, we progressed into marriage, and so that is still the rule. That is still our law. So she said, sign this off and I'll be more than happy to give you the money. Now, a lot of people that knew about that said they said that to people, they put it on paper, but it was strictly for tax purposes. So we could save some money by putting this way. Now, I'm not an accountant. If you are, please comment. But this was what was said. The DA wasn't buying that. He said, okay, you have paperwork here. We don't have nothing that is relating to that. Plus, now that we have that you were in debt to her there, we found out, we researched your house, your condo, and part of you being out of jail at this point while I'm investigating is not to have a gun in your means because of what happened to Diane. We searched your condo And we found in your sock drawer with bullets just above that drawer, okay, a gun that fits the description of another gun very similar that shoots. Well, you get the moral of the story. So you broke the rule of your bond, is what I'm getting at. You broke the rule of your bond, and now you are arrested again until we go to trial. There will be no bail. You are going to go through this because you broke your bond, and this was appointed now by the judge through the DA. So he's sitting in jail, and they're doing more research. They're getting more and more reference to the financial gain and loss of Tex. So Tex had found out also that he had been in debt for $750,000 before the $350,000. And here's the catch to that, that she said at this point, now I'm giving this money. I want a piece of the pie, God forbid. And so he says, okay, what do you need? I want you to sign this paper that gives me property holdings that I will have the right that if this is not getting paid off, and if you're not getting on your payment plan with me and you're not able to get back on your feet, I can sell this estate. And he signed off on that. Now, when she was killed, murdered, whatever way, accidental, there was also a will, if you will, because Diane was worth, I think it was $1.7 million. And who's the trustee? Who would get it? Well, it was an order for Tex. Now, the claim is I didn't need it. I was still on my feet. That had nothing to do with nothing, but does it wash? Let's put it all together. Here's Tex sitting in the back seat and reference to I need the gun. It's in the glove box because we're going through a bad neighborhood. Okay. And all of these things that you know it was said. Gives the gun, it's in a plastic shopping bag. He falls asleep, wakes up abruptly, boom, shoots her, hits her in the back, rushes her to a hospital that is not as close as the other ones, particularly the trauma center. Now, she goes to the hospital. She does stay. This was accidental. He did not mean to shoot me. Didn't know what her, outcome was going to be. Unfortunately, she passed away. Fast forward. He gets out, accidental, involuntary manslaughter. He starts selling parts of her estate, but does confirm that it's going elsewhere. Then, as he's out, the DA says, I don't like what was said. I don't also like the chain of events. So, therefore, I'm going to look into him, finds financial problems. This starts to add up. And now he goes to court. He goes to court, and the jury says, we don't see that this was a crime of malice. However, it is still a felony that we do believe that you shot the gun, but there was no malice. So that was a little odd, and they all carry the same term. So even though you didn't do this out of malice, but you did shoot her, which makes this a felony. So you got life in prison. And this is where Tex stood in the end. So I'm going to have a conclusion question for you now in reference to how you'd like to end these questions and your answers on this is what should have happened to Tex. It was an accident. It wasn't an accident. How you feel how this could be concluded by you putting comments over there. I'm going to put up a question and then we're going to sign off on this really powerful but tragedy in reference to Diane and the accidental or murder of her life going to end. So without further ado, here's your poll question. All right, so this concludes our podcast for your day or evening, wherever you are. And I thank you for attending and being a part of this by answering the questions. But once again, if you can, it helps this podcast a lot. Please like, subscribe, and share so we can continue this growth together on our journey of true crime in reference to stewing the pot. And I love having you here with me as my assistant in life coaching. So again, thank you again for watching, listening, and have a wonderful and great day or evening wherever you are. Until next time, continue to stew the pot.